What is up? You know what day it is. Welcome back to another weekly Wednesday Q&A. So per usual, what I did earlier in the day was put out a status asking people to ask me questions. And as they were rolling in, we took note of them, and we're going to get to these coming up in this week's video. So we'll wait for a few people to roll in, but we will get to it. Had a few good ones here, so we'll take our time answering them. Some are a little bit more complicated than others. But we'll get to it. Matt asked a couple good questions here, so we'll get to those to start off with. See, a couple people are rolling in, so we'll officially get to the questions. All right, Matt said, how much lean tissue can an experienced natural physique athlete really expect to put on in a year? How much can they expect to maintain after cutting? So we'll cover the first part of Matt's question. How much can an experienced physique athlete put on in a year? And that one's tough. That is a very good question from Matt. And what I always use myself as an example, obviously, because I know myself the best. And I actually calculated my perceived rate of gain over the course of my bodybuilding career. So as many of you know, I started bodybuilding when I was 19 years old. I'm currently 26. And we'll see next year when I compete again what my stage weight is. But I roughly calculated it, and on average, I've gained about 4 pounds of muscle a year. And I would say, and that's over my career. Now that I'm a little bit more slightly advanced, I would basically say it might be at the point of 2 to 3 pounds a year. And I would say in the future, it's going to probably go down. I might be battling for 1 to 2 pounds a year in a few years. But right now, I would say that depending on your experience level, so I would say someone that's experienced has been training for a little bit over 5 years. I've personally been training 6. So I would say that you might be able to get away with 3 to 4 pounds of muscle per year. But once again, that's, I guess, for males. Women might be a little bit less. And then it's going to come down to, your genetics. How much muscular potential do you have? How big a frame do you have? Someone that's a little bit taller has a little bit larger frame. They might be able to add a little bit more muscle. Someone that's a little bit shorter might have a little bit harder time adding muscle to that frame. So there's a lot of variables that come into play. But if I had to say, it would be, 3 to 4 pounds of muscle for an experienced natural athlete. Now, how much muscle can they expect to maintain after cutting? So what Matt is referring to is basically going through an entire contest prep. How much muscle can you expect to maintain? Well, just like many of us know, any new muscle that we gain is probably going to be the first to go. So hopefully we hold on to most of that new muscle that we put on, but some of that might actually go away. The goal, and I think what Matt's getting at, and he's heard me talk about this basically every single week, is trying to maintain as much muscle as possible. I think the diet methods have to do a lot with that. So hopefully, your diet methods year after year. Matt, I'm still on your question, buddy. Hopefully your diet methods year after year get a little better so that we can maintain that muscle mass. But hopefully, we hang on to as much of that as possible. It hurts me to say it, but it's the truth, and you guys always know I tell the truth, is that during a contest prep, we will lose muscle. No matter how hard you try, if your body is in a deficit for a long time, we're going to lose some muscle, and that's the last thing anybody wants to hear, but it's the truth. Now, like I said before, it's optimizing our diet and our training so we're not losing as much muscle as possible and we're holding on to it. But that's another rant for another day for me, and I might even get to that later. But I'll try to hit most of the questions here. Matt, question number 2. He asked cardio versus calorie cutting. He said when and why to do either. So what Matt is getting at is he would say, and Matt is currently in contest prep about to compete in Worlds and is currently working with me, just so everyone kind of knows. But for Matt's background, we basically did zero cardio all of prep. And really, I only like to use cardio as a tool to spur weight loss. And for Matt's weight loss, it was very steady. I haven't made the final calculation yet, but I would say it's a safe bet that Matt actually lost less than a pound a week when he was working with me. And we really didn't have to add any cardio. There was only a few cardio sessions thrown in there. every other week maybe towards the very end. And then in this week, we just gave him 1 or 2 sessions leading up to Worlds. So based off of that, I try to save cardio for a last resort. I try to do most of the damage with food just because I feel like cardio can take away some of that lean tissue that we've worked hard to put on. And that's the last thing that we want to do is basically turn somebody into a long distance runner, running for an hour plus, on the treadmill or doing whatever. That's going to burn a lot of muscle. You're going to end up turning it into, a Kenyan marathoner as opposed to a bodybuilder if we're doing too much cardio. So I typically weigh on the side of food first, then cardio. But some people, for instance, Jennifer Page, who just competed a couple weekends ago in the Yorton Cup in the amateur side, she would rather do more cardio. So we actually, and it's per the athlete, we gave her more cardio than I took away food. So she was still eating a significant amount relatively in comparison, but we pushed more cardio for her because she could handle it. Some people like myself, like Matt, they just don't like cardio. They would rather cut the food a little bit. And I might be speaking for Matt there a little bit, but I know I definitely don't like doing cardio, so I would much rather dial my food down than have to do more cardio so I wouldn't waste any muscle. Blaine, I'm going to see what you said here. Wouldn't you agree it is hard really to tell how much muscle is put on in many cases? Yep. Yeah, for sure. So many even after making gains at the same stage weight, even a little bit leaner, lighter the next year. Yeah, for sure, Blaine. It is very hard to tell. And the way that I calculated my rate of gain, and it's going to be a rough guesstimate, But what I looked at was my stage weights over time, and then I looked at the relative leanness and made an educated guess on how much muscle I've gained. Now that I've actually gotten to a point where I've had elite level of conditioning, I think it's going to be a little bit easier to gauge how much muscle I've gained over the years. So in 2015, obviously a lot of you guys have seen like my profile picture or whatever, the pictures I've had up from my last contest prep, and I got pretty peeled, I would say so at least. So in 2018, when I'm going to compete, I'm going to look at my stage weight in 2018 and compare that to 2015 and see how much muscle I've gained relatively. Hopefully it's going to be, 4 pounds, 5 pounds, if not more. I'm not expecting it to be tremendous. I mean, I saw a low of 164 pounds in 2015, so I am hoping that next year I'm going to see like a 168 to 169, maybe 170. But who knows? Once again, so it was very hard to tell. Blaine, that was a great comment. And then Blaine also said, what's the most cardio you've seen one of your bodybuilders have to do and get stage lean? Any examples of more hyper-responsive clients? So Blaine, that's a good question. You're making me think. If it's a bodybuilder, I would say the most I've ever had anyone do was just 4 sessions a week, and usually it's split up like 2 miss, 2 hit. But I really don't push any of those sessions longer than 30 minutes. I feel like if it's over 30 minutes, then we're just going to be wasting too much muscle. So honestly, not a lot. Some of my bikini girls, I do have them do a little bit more cardio just because their food tends to get a little bit lower than a bodybuilder's. So I have them do more cardio. But honestly, none of my bodybuilders do quite a significant amount of cardio. Like I said, Matt is a physique competitor. He might as well be a bodybuilder. I mean, he's 185 pounds, and he did 1 session of miss like 3 months, 2-3 months, and we took it in and out. So really, I try not to have a lot of my athletes do cardio. I'm not a big fan of it, only if necessary, if their food starts to get low. Brandon, how do you feel about fasting on a daily basis? I've been doing it for about 4 months, and I've lost a lot of strength, but I did lose 40 pounds. Okay. I feel great, but I'm stuck in a certain site for about a month now. I do 16 and 8, which are the ratios that he's fasting and eating for, and some days 19 and 5, excuse me. So damn, dude, first of all, Brandon, nice job losing 40 pounds. That is not a small feat, dude. I understand why you feel like shit because, you are fasting for that long, and you might have, and I covered it in the first one about potentially gaining and losing muscle. I would say that you've probably lost a little bit of muscle along the way, so that's why Did you say that your strength was down? All right. Lost a lot of strength. Yeah. So you're probably losing muscle. I would say you might just not be eating enough in general. And did you say a timeline here? I've been doing it for about 4 months. Yeah, dieting for 4 months straight. So that's like 16 weeks, 17, 18 weeks. It might be time to start bumping up your food, honestly. I mean, you've lost a lot of weight in a very short amount of time. That's over two pounds a week. I would say, honestly, for you, it's time to get in a surplus or at least go to maintenance to stop your weight loss. I'm not necessarily a fan of fasting, in all honesty. Now, I know some people it works better for if they have like super busy schedules and they can only eat, a certain amount of time, or like for religious reasons or whatever. But I would rather see you start increasing your calories now, and then, if anything, just widening your ratios a little bit of the time that you're actually eating. Increase the time that you're eating and lower the time that you're fasting. That would be my advice to you, but I think you've done enough damage right now. I mean, you've lost 40 pounds. You bring your food up throughout the holidays, even for a few months in the new year, and then, consider going back into a deficit, well into 2018. I mean, wait till like May to go into another deficit. You've lost a lot of weight. Amanda, this is my coach. Yeah, Lydia. Blaine, lucky bastard. All right, let me get into another question here. Petro said, how to deal with any remaining stomach fat a few days away from the show. So when this question rolled in, I thought about just answering it directly, but I figured I'd wait till the video. So a few days away from the show, I think a lot of people, yeah, Brandon, no problem. I think a lot of people have been in that situation where they're a week out, let's say they're a week out from a show, and they feel like they're just not ready yet. They need to lose more fat. During that last week, in my opinion, you shouldn't really be seeking any new fat loss. You really should just be maintaining and trying to polish off your physique. And unfortunately, if you have fat to lose and you're a week out, there's, honest to God, not much you can do. I mean, you might try to hammer away at the cardio, but that might do more damage than good, especially if you've been in a deficit for a long time and your body's primed to lose muscle. I would say, if anything, and this is the truth, I would say try to pick another show. You try to get your money back from the promoter if possible. Worst case scenario, you lose out on a little bit of money. But I would say delay your show and pick another one so you could be ready. After all, you don't want to go to a show at anything but your best. So if you still have fat to lose and he said a few days away, there's no shame in backing out. I mean, I'm not a quitter, but if the rubber meets the road and you're just not happy with how you look, wait and then pick a show, a few days. Matt said dig a hole and never eat. I don't think so, buddy. Zach asked, opinion on when to do a mini cut. Do you generally go off of a ratio? Example, like 5 months of massing, 1 month of cutting, repeat. So Zach, that was a really good question when that rolled in, and that made me think. And I think everyone that tunes into these Q&As knows that there's no one answer that I ever give. It's never black and white. So Zach and anybody, if you're considering doing a mini cut, I would look at the time that you've spent, first of all, in a surplus. So Zach gave a good example. If you've spent 5 months in a surplus and then you go 1 month of mini cut, I could see that working. So that's 6 months. So technically you do 2 mini cuts a year. Now, me personally, in the past, what I've done, at least since 2015, is I've dieted only basically once a year. And I did 1 mini cut a year. And I mean, yeah, I did it a little bit longer than 1 month. Of course, it was, maybe 2-3 months. But I only did once a year. So I would say limiting the amount of times that you are doing mini cuts per year to 1 or to 2 would be most beneficial. Obviously, we want to see you be in a surplus longer than you're in a deficit. So a ratio, I don't have a set ratio, but and I've talked about in the past was the new concept of contest prep dieting, and I'm going to play with that over the course of the end of this year and going into next year, Zach. So I'm potentially going to diet for like 8 weeks or 10 weeks, and then I'm going to bring up my food for 2 weeks. So really, in between there, if I'm going to diet for 16 weeks, I'm going to raise it up to 4. So it might actually be a 4-to-1 ratio for contest prep. If you're in off season, I would try to just maintain body weight and see how much strength you can gain, and don't necessarily focus on weight. And I feel like a lot of people, especially younger guys like yourself, always, we're trying to look good for the ladies out there going to the beach and everything, whatnot. I mean, if you're in school, trying to attract the opposite sex. So we want to look decent. So I see where you're getting at, but yeah, I mean, limit it to 1 mini cut a year. No longer than 12 weeks. Lydia, she has a couple here in a row. One just rolled in. Coming out of a competition season. Wait, let's see here. Sometimes I have a hard time reading and speaking at the same time, guys. Coming out of a competition season, how soon is too soon? Like in my case, 2 years out from competition. Lydia, I would say for you, or what would require before doing a mini cut? So Lydia competed this year. She turned pro, and now she's going to try to compete in the pro rank. She's going to take 2 years off, and dating's overrated, Matt said. Oh, boy. Hold on. I need a drink. I only made it fucking 16 minutes, Matt. Anyway, Lydia. So she is going to try to go into the pro rank. She needs to focus on just body recomposition in general. And the way that she's going about it is, I mean, I've seen her progress pictures, even though she's not currently working with me. She's doing a fantastic job of maintaining a proper body composition, keeping her figure. She's not getting an exorbitant amount of weight. She's focusing on gaining her strength and just adding as much lean tissue as possible. So someone that is going to wait 2 years is basically, in my opinion, they shouldn't really go into a mini cut. Just maybe even 1 mini cut in the time from stage to stage. You want to focus on gaining as much lean tissue as possible. Don't waste your time mini cutting 2 and 3 times in between, because actually 2 years, in my opinion, is a short amount of time to compete from stage to stage. That's why I do 3, and I give myself, I'm going to go 3.5. That's why I give myself plenty enough time to compete. All right, I'll go back to the questions that were in the post. Lydia had another one. It was very good. And this is, I know she's asking this for her next time. How to scope out and plan for shows that in all capital letters, will be well attended. So what Lydia is getting at is, I know that she went to a show this past weekend in a little bit smaller organization for her suit making company. And basically, there was 3-figure competitors, quite a few bikini competitors, not a lot of bodybuilders. So for her being a figure athlete, obviously she wants to compete against as many figure pros as possible. So anybody, and what I do for a lot of my clients is I go on the promoter's website. I go to the page, I go to the Facebook page, I stalk people that have competed in those shows before, and I look at the competition. I see how many people have competed. I look at the stage lighting, I look at how well the show was promoted, how well it was advertised, and I kind of put those things all together. I look at even years in the past. So one show that's in my general area is the NGA Heart of America. That's usually in May. On their website, they have shows for the past so many years. I actually won that show in 2015, and when I went to do that show, I looked at the 2014 show and the 2013 show, and I'm like, all right, I looked at their amateurs, I looked at their pros, I want to see how they look. So anyone going into a show, especially with social media nowadays, you could type it into YouTube, you type it into Facebook, you go on their website. It's easy to see how many people have competed in that show. And then, honest to God, don't be afraid to email the promoter and be like, hey, how many pro bodybuilders do you have showing up this year? I'm going to do that next year. I don't care. If they don't want to tell me, then I'm going to say, hey, I'm not going to do your show. You have to know how many people, especially at the pro level. You don't want to travel halfway across the country and nobody show up. Now, I know some people do that also. They ask the promoter, like, look, I'll do the show, but as long as there's, 5 people signed up. And then don't be afraid to ask for your money back. So say, if there's 5 people, I'll do it. You could sign up and then be like, hey, you know what? If 5 people don't show, I want my money back because it's just not going to be worth my time. I mean, I'm near Chicago. If I'm going to travel to the East Coast or the West Coast to compete, I want to make sure that there's going to be enough competitors to make it worth my while. So don't be afraid to reach out to the promoters themselves and say, hey, what's the list looking like? And you're going right to the source. So there's no guessing, really, when it comes to that. Lydia, another question. How often is too often to train abs? Abs, just like any muscle group, should get trained with the same intensity, in my opinion. Just keep in mind, when we are squatting, when we are deadlifting, we are engaging our core. It's not necessarily direct work, it's indirect work. So I would say direct work 2 to 3 times a week, no more than 3 in my opinion, especially if you're doing weighted exercises. Make it a minute, at least 2, max 3, just so you're not fatiguing yourself. And because we are going to put stress on our core when we're squatting, when we're deadlifting, we don't want it to be overly fatigued because that's when injuries could happen. So don't really push abs too much just because they are getting hit at other times. Tommy, how much strength loss is typical during the last few weeks of prep? And when I saw that question roll in, I know where Tommy is in his prep. He is a few weeks out from his contest. And strength loss happens to a lot of us, especially as we diet down. Obviously, our calories are lower, performance is not as great, testosterone levels are a little bit lower, sleep's at a premium, and we just are not performing as well. So I think a lot of people focus too much on the actual weight that they're lifting and not on their general workouts. So sure, you want to try to push your workouts as hard as possible, but at the end of the day, strength should not be your number one concern. It should just be, especially in the last few weeks, just having quality workouts. Don't beat yourself up about not being able to pull 405 off the ground anymore, or 315, or whatever you're doing, or not being able to bench press 225 for sets of 25. It's just getting, the workouts in, expending that energy, and trying to maintain as much muscle mass as possible. Now, there are ways to counteract strength loss, and that's taking weight loss slower. That's jumping on a test booster, especially in the last phase of the diet. But really, a lot of people do see strength loss. Very few people see strength gain leading into a show. The only time you ever really see strength gain is when you've had time to increase your food into a show. That's the perfect scenario, in my opinion, to be able to build yourself into a show. So sometimes you see a little bit of refractory when it comes to putting on strength into a show, but more often than not, you're going to be losing it, unfortunately. Lydia, once again, what is your favorite credible health, fitness, bodybuilding site or database for research topics to gain information? All right, so Lydia, I see you're still here. When I saw this one, I used to, go online a lot and try to go on different websites. But honestly, what I did, and what I think that everyone should do, is really find people in the industry that put out good information. Hopefully, I'm one of them, and listen to them, because I feel like that's where, if people are very active, I try to be as active as I can when it comes to putting out quality information. Guys that I looked at, and I'm not afraid to name them, are like Alberto Nunez, Jeff Alberts, were 2 big guys. Guys that are my age, even like Chris Bearcat puts out really good information, even though basically we're like rival coaches, and you learn stuff off of them, right? So there's guys that are older than me that have been doing this a lot longer, and I'm not afraid to see what they have to say and then potentially, learn from them. I went on YouTube, and I always go to different podcasts. There's a couple guys in the UK, AJ Morris and Steve Hall, that do really great interviews. So honestly, I've looked at more interviews from people that were successful in the industry, and I've kind of listened to what they had to say and kind of made it my own. So honestly, I would look for individuals who you really resonate with. And Matt, who's this Brandon Wadas guy? Yeah, I think you know about now. And then focus on them, and see where they kind of take you, and then don't be afraid to reach out to them if you have any questions. And then obviously, Lydia, I know that you do that with me, not only from a business standpoint, but from a bodybuilding standpoint too. Tyler, just saw another one roll in. What certifications, degrees do I hold? So, and that is a good one because I just saw John Yobst make a post about this today, about like people not being like certified or whatever. And honestly, it might shock you that I actually went to school for business. I did not go to school for nutrition. So I went for business management. I have a business degree, and I'm a certified personal trainer. And I think a lot of people they knock personal experience, but honestly, I mean at this point in time, I've worked too close with just over 100 competitors, and I feel like firsthand experience is your best teacher. And looking back, like when I first started coaching to when I'm coaching now, I've learned so much more than I ever did, out of a book. So I think you have to like really get into the trenches. I don't really like when people say that, but that's where I learned the most is just from working from individual to individual. So yeah, Tyler, it's NASM that I'm certified under, but that's about it. A lot of it is just my own personal experience with working with myself, and then of course working with a lot of other competitors. All right, James, appreciate that, buddy. Let's see here. Matt, starting my dream crushing life. What a fig. All right, Leah. She always asks really good questions. Leah, how to deal with constantly feeling full. So Leah is coming from a point where she was just dieting for a very, very long time. And she's at a point now where she's just eating more food than she ever has. And she feels really full. She has a hard time actually getting her food in. And a lot of people hate on that, but I know where she's coming from. So Leah, some things that we could do is spacing out our meals a little bit longer so we have more time to digest. Another thing that we might start doing with you, because Leah does work with me, is we actually might start transferring some calories instead of adding in carbohydrates, and carbohydrates tend to be a little bit more voluminous depending on what you're eating. We could actually try to push more calories towards fat, because if you eat things like, let's say like nuts or peanut butter or whatever for your fat, it won't occupy as much space, so that might help you keep less full. So basically those two things, spacing them out and then choosing different foods that won't occupy as much space in your system. Tyler, do you use a prep coach yourself as I do, despite coaching others? No, Tyler, I'm not going to work with anybody for the rest of my life. I don't think so. I'm going to do everything by myself. I think that I've learned enough over the time that I've been bodybuilding to coach myself now, especially with working all these other, with these other athletes. So yeah, I'm just gonna coach myself from here on out. If anything, I'm just gonna, use a couple of my close friends, in the last couple of weeks or, the last month or so to see if they think I need to lose any more. I mean, I'm friends with a lot of high level coaches, and I have a lot of friends that are bodybuilders. So, I'll pick a few, some of the top pros that I'm good friends with and get their opinion, but I'll do all the decision making on my macros and my training and, the amount of cardio. So yeah, I'll be coaching myself. All right, moving right along. Lydia, we're here to hold you accountable. Thank you. Are there any organizations that you avoid or have your competitors avoid? Oh, Tyler, I don't know if I want to answer that on here, buddy. I try to spread out the wealth evenly. But Tyler, I might message you later on tonight about that one. All right. What is the most aggressive drop you've ever done to a client during a contest prep? Asking for a friend. That was with Matthias. So Matthias, I really don't try to make too aggressive drops. If anything, at the very beginning of people's contest preps, I might make more of an aggressive drop to get them into a deficit. But really, I mean, that cut is going to be, week to week, it might be 100 calories. I mean, sometimes just a little bit more. That initial drop might be, let's say like 300 to 400 calories to see if their drop's going to go in. Yeah, and Tyler, you are poking the bear, man. So no, I really don't try to make too aggressive drops. I think that's irresponsible. When people start by just cutting their calories in half to start a prep, I think that's about the stupidest thing you can do. I tend to ease people into it a little bit more, but obviously that first initial drop is going to be a lot more. So Matthias, no, I really don't make too aggressive drops. Garrett had asked this question before, but I'll answer it again because he said he's claiming old age. I can't remember if I asked this before. Deadlifting with the barbell versus hex bar. Why do people say that hex bar isn't really deadlifting? Garrett, I would say that just because with the hex bar you use a little bit more quad. With the deadlift, it's going to be a little bit more hamstring and back, in my opinion, just because of your body placement. Thomas Lawrence. Oh, no, shit. I almost skipped over one. Jake asked a very good question. Hopefully Jake's still on here. I saw him tune in a little bit earlier. He asked reverse dieting or recovery diet. So I think a lot of us know what reverse dieting is. That's slowly increasing your calories from a deficit. And on the other hand, the recovery diet would be one that you gain not a lot of weight, but it's typically like 7 to 10 pounds in a very short time right after your show. And that is mainly fat. And I'm not a huge fan of gaining a ton of fat after a show. And in conjunction with that question, Thomas asked me, backing off of this one, would you say that opting for one or the other, so reverse dieting or recovery diet, based off of your client, where they are both mentally or physically, where they are at both mentally and physically after a show, how much can you continue to handle? So those two questions kind of go together. So how do you choose whether to do a reverse diet or a recovery diet? Well, in my opinion, I don't do a recovery diet. I do a faster reverse diet. Julie, did you miss your question? Julie, I skipped your question. I'm sorry. So no, you didn't miss it. I'll get back to it. And Julie, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to skip over your question. But anyway, so I have different methods. If someone is in a state where they are eating low foods, and they're barely making it in a contest prep, and they're not going to compete for a long time, I will make very, very aggressive bumps the first few weeks, reversing them out. So is that more of a recovery diet? Not necessarily, because my main goal is not fat gain. I feel like a lot of times the recovery diet looks for fat gain, and they claim that it's going to help with hormonal balances, and everything that I've seen personally has shown that your hormones don't recover with fat. You might see an initial bump just because of the increased calories. You might see a little bit of muscle regain, but as far as the hormones balancing out, that takes months to recover, whether you gain fat or you don't. Now, with a reverse diet, I'm not a big fan of just adding 10 grams of carbs per week. I feel like that's what a lot of people do, and really that's just going to keep you in a deficit for way too long. You're going to end up losing muscle, and you're going to screw yourself up. So that's why I make very, very aggressive moves coming out of a hole. And I'm going to use one example. A couple weeks ago, I mentioned her in the video earlier, Jen, who turned pro in the OCB and Masters and Bikini Open. She was eating 90 grams of carbs going into the show, which is pretty common for most bikini competitors. I made 2 jumps. She just checked in today. The first jump I made was from 90 grams of carbs a day to 140. So that was a significant bump. That was 50 grams of carbs. And then today when she checked in, her weight maintained or is up like not even a pound. So I gave her another bump, which was 25 grams of carbs. And of course I added fat also. But so in the course of a week and a half, I added about 75 grams of carbs to her diet right out of the gate. And depending on what her weight does, again, next week I might do more of the same. I might jump at 30 grams of carbs. And for her, I gave her the option either to do like a range or just set numbers. And she said, no, I want just set numbers. Just give them to me. I'll stick with them. For some people that are having a hard time coming out of a show, sometimes I give them a range to hit. So let's say, you're supposed to eat, like for Jen's case, 140 to 165 grams of carbs a day, and you have to be somewhere in there. Other people just like to be able to have a number and hit it, and honestly, I feel like that method, you can add it a lot quicker if people are willing to stick to it. Now, the key thing is to, after a show, what diet is the person going to be able to stick to? Are they going to be able to hit set numbers? Or are they going to need major increases? Because let's say you increase someone 1,000 calories in a week. Obviously, they're going to put on fat. With Jen, I mean, we didn't do 1,000 calories, but we're going to damn near double her carbohydrate intake in 2 weeks. And I mean, sure, she was eating 90 grams of carbs, and I'm sure next week she'll be eating, over 180, depending on what her weight does. But it's just about getting that food up quickly, yet responsibly. I'm not a fan of gaining 7 pounds in a month after a show. I don't see any point. I don't also see a point of being stage weight for that amount of time. If anything, after a show, I mean, I like to see, depending on how big someone is, maybe a max of, a pound a week. But honestly, the first couple weeks I'll allow it, but then after that, why just add insult to injury by adding more fat and fat? And I think what happens a lot of the time is that people start to not have a good mentality about themselves. Obviously, you dieted for a long time. You're looking, a lot better as you kept dieting down. You reach the point of your peak at the show, and then after the show, once you start gaining this weight, and if you gain it too quickly, then that's where you could see depression or the AKA the post-show blues. So that's why I think the recovery diet can hurt people mentally a little bit in that aspect. It could also, the reverse diet also can hurt people mentally because they're so restricted. So yeah, it's going to be on an individual basis on who does what diet. But I tend to either swing to a quote unquote a little bit stricter reverse diet depending on when their next show is, or I go for a more aggressive reverse diet, but I still keep their rate of gain in check no matter what. And then I got to go back to Julie's question because I somehow missed it, and she's going to yell at me. Oh, and Julie, I know why I skipped your question, because you commented under someone else's question, and that's why I missed it. All right, so Julie asked, is true hunger versus not, especially in the off season? Should you feel hungry between meals in the off season? And is a grumbly stomach a sign of hunger? And this is why I love these videos, is because I didn't know the answer to that last question. Is a grumbly stomach a sign of hunger? And the short answer is no, but the longer answer is your stomach grumbles throughout the course of the day. You just really don't notice it as much. The time that you notice your stomach grumbling is when it is notice it grumbling the loudest is when the stomach is empty, because it magnifies the sound almost. I mean, that's what I read. Whether you believe that or not, I honestly don't know. But true hunger, we'll go back to the beginning of her question, true hunger versus not, especially in the off season. So Julie is in the midst of her off season. If you don't know, she is a bikini pro in the IPE. Pretty tough if you ask me. But she is trying to maintain a respectable physique in her off season because she plans on competing next year. So for her, it is not necessarily optimal to be gaining a lot of fat in the off season. So what I'm understanding about Julie is that she doesn't want to force feed herself in the off season for the sake of just eating more. And I would agree with that on certain points, and I would disagree with it on others. I would disagree with it because if you can maximize your intake level in your off season, it'll help you potentially with performance, it'll help you potentially with muscle gain, and it'll set you up higher for the time that you go to diet. I will disagree with force feeding because honestly, it's never good to force feed yourself to the point where you're getting sick or you're feeling uncomfortable. So yeah, I mean, true hunger, I would, and I'm in full-blown off-season mode right now, although I've done, a mini cut this year, and I'll do a mini cut at the beginning of next year, kind of setting myself up for my phase 2 of my contest prep. But even in my off-seasons, I am still pretty hungry when my meals roll around. If I'm not like super focused, busy on on work. Usually at the 3 hour mark, by the 4 hour mark, I'm definitely hungry. So yeah, I mean, I personally get hungry during my off seasons. Obviously during contest prep, I get hungry. So should you feel hungry between meals in the off season? I would say yes. If you're at a point where you're just force feeding it, I would look at your food choices, maybe decrease the volume of your food, eat a little bit more dense, just so it doesn't occupy as much space in your stomach. That might help you if you're struggling with that. Thomas said Jurassic bulk. I don't think Julie needs to go on a Jurassic bulk. So I'm not crazy. No, you're not crazy. Julie, I've been at points in the past where I was force feeding myself. I mean, shit. At one point in time, this might shock some of the people that are tuning into this video. I was actually eating just over 100 grams of fat. It was under 110, but let's say like 105 grams of fat, 700 carbs, and like 250 grams of protein. And to eat 700 grams of carbs a day was painful. I remember sitting at the table trying to eat like 3 servings of pasta and sauce, and I'm just sitting there and it's getting cold, and I'm like, oh my God, I just can't do it. And I ate 700 grams of carbs for maybe 2 or 3 months, and I just couldn't do it anymore. It hurt to have to eat that much, so I had to dial it back. I took it back to 650, and I was at that point too where honestly, like I couldn't gain any more fat if I wanted to. Like my body was kind of maxed out. I'd have to really, really push the calories if I was going to gain any more fat, just because my body fat set point doesn't allow me to get like super obese. But yeah, to sum it up, yeah, there's points in time where you shouldn't force feed, and maybe just dial it back slightly. Just make sure you are eating enough going into your next contest prep season where you could take away from. So it's a fine balancing act. And I know Julie personally, and she is, very close to her body composition for her show. So I think her main goal, if I was going to coach her, would be just to make sure she's eating enough where we could take away from. So anyone that is struggling with eating in the off season, eating enough, just make sure that you're still eating enough where when you do in fact go to diet for a contest, you'll have enough to take away from. Just because you're comfortable eating now, we all know that we get hungry during contest prep. As you can see, Matt keeps commenting on the thread saying that he could eat 700 grams of carbs a day. Matt, once you do it and you've been down that road and you've had to eat that many, I doubt that you'll want to do it again. I think that is all the questions. I'm going to do a quick glance through. Let's see here. Yeah, that is all the questions. So thank you, everybody, again for tuning in. These questions keep getting better and better throughout the week. So next week, Wednesday, make sure to tune in, same time, same place. I will be talking to some of you privately here in the next hour or so. But thank you for tuning in. Have a great night and enjoy the rest of your week.